We've learned a couple ways to use if statements to add some flexibility to our decisions. Sometimes we need to make what we might call a hierarchical decision, where we make one big decision, and once we've done that, we drill down into a more specific choice. For example, when the server hands you a menu at a restaurant, you first have to decide if you're going to order from the breakfast, lunch, or dinner options. Once you've made that decision, you can look at the specific choices for that meal. In coding, we can make this kind of hierarchical decision with a nested if statement. I'm an old-fashioned guy. Well, I'm an old guy, but I'm also old-fashioned. When I was young and there was no Spotify, we'd go to the record store to get music we wanted. Like everyone else my age, I always thought it would be cool to own a record store. So we're going to consider a simple record store inventory system to learn about nested if statements. We're going to work with a class called VinylRecord and a demo program called VinylRecord Demo. The code for both files is available from the GitHub repository for this course, which is linked in the description and is also linked in the ebook. This is going to be a class for an inventory and pricing application for a record shop. This shop prices albums based on their genre. This chart shows a few genres and their corresponding prices. General rock albums are $15, but classic rock and grunge cost a little more at $15 and $25. And while general blues albums are $25, Chicago blues and Delta blues are priced higher. And anything that's not a rock or blues album gets a price of $10. Just like our restaurant menu example, determining the price of a specific record is a hierarchical decision. We first need to decide if the album is rock, blues, or something else. Once we've made that decision, we can make a more specific decision to establish the price. Here's the diagram for the class we're using. First, notice that there are a couple methods on the diagram that aren't in our code. We're missing the constructor, and we're missing the setGenre method. And there are a couple other things to point out. The way the diagram shows setGenre doesn't follow our usual pattern. It has two parameters. And there's no setPrice method at all, so there's no way to get a value into that field. Since the price is determined by the genre and subgenre, there's no need to set the price directly, so I've done it this way on purpose. In fact, if we let someone set the price directly, they might price it wrong. So we'll take care of setting the price in the setGenre method. Let's also take a quick look at the demo class because I have some test code in place there already. This code creates 4 albums and uses setters to put the data in, and then there's commented out code to use the constructor once we have that constructor written. But more interesting is that I created a method called displayRecord that outputs all the data for a vinyl record object. In order to test this class, I'm going to end up making a bunch of objects, and then for each object, I'm going to have a bunch of really similar print line statements to output those values. It's the kind of thing I would probably copy and paste and then modify. But as a general rule, if you find yourself copying and pasting, you should probably stop and think about using a method instead. We call this a helper method because it really just helps us test the class and doesn't have a role outside of this context. And for that reason, I made it private. It accepts a vinyl record object as a parameter, and this is the first time we've seen an object passed in like that, and then it prints out all of the data for that object. Remember this code when you need an example of how you can pass an object into a method. Incidentally, there is another way to solve this problem of all the print line statements, but I'll save that for a future video. Okay, let's go back to our object class and create the header for setGenre. It's a void method with parameters for the genre and subgenre, at least according to the diagram. The body will be like other setters, but with 2 assignment statements instead of 1. Once we've set those fields, we can set the price. First up, we'll create an if block to check if the genre is rock. Remember that we can't use the equals equals operator to compare strings. We'll use the dot equals method instead. If it is a rock album, we still need to check the subgenre, so we'll have more code in a little bit, but for now, I'll just set the price to $15, which is the default for a rock album, and we'll worry about getting the rest of this top-level decision in place first. If it's not a rock album, we need to check if it's a blues album. That means adding an else-if statement with another dot equals call. The default for a blues album is $25, so we'll set the price to that. And finally, we'll need a catch-all else block for anything that's not a rock or blues album. We'll set the price to $10 in this block. If we go back to that idea of a hierarchical decision, this would be the top-level decision. It's the choice we have to make first, like breakfast, lunch, or dinner. This is a good place to go over to the demo class and make sure it's working so far. This shows that our top-level decision structure is working, so now we can focus on the next level of decisions. Inside the block for our rock albums, we need to look at the subgenre of the record. My if statement will check to see if it's a classic rock album. If so, we'll set the price to $20. We'll need an else if statement to check for grunge albums and set the price to $25 for those. And we'll need an else block to catch any other rock album, which is that $15 default that we already have in place. Let's give this a shot and see how we're doing. We're clearly on the right track. So now it's just a matter of applying that same kind of structure to our blues genre. The first if block will check for Chicago blues and set the price to $30. The else if block will check for Delta blues and set the price to $35. And the else block will set the default price for any other blues album to $25. All of this is followed by our else statement that sets the price to $10 for any album that isn't within one of those first level decisions. But if we had more genres, we could just keep adding else if blocks and then if else statements within those for subgenre pricing. And we could get as many genres and subgenres as we need. And unless I'm forgetting something, I think we're pretty much done. So let's do one more test of the full functionality. And that's how we can use nested if statements. This gives us a way to make broad decisions first and then drill down into more specific decisions. This is a common pattern in programming, and it's a good way to structure our code when we have a series of related decisions to make. Combined with the other strategies we've already learned, we have a good set of tools for making just about any kind of decision we'll need in our code.